everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and what a fantastic rollout. I'm afraid I feel very embarrassed having not been aware of the earlier 8 forums that you've held on these subjects, but very happy for my staff and for myself to participate going forward where that will be useful for you, so thank you very much. Can I first also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. In particular, in paying that respect, I want to acknowledge the role that they play as custodians of the culture of one of the longest human cultures in human history. And for that, it takes us right back to what Shannon was talking about, the great-great-great-great-grandfathers and the stories and the richness that brings to society. And when I look out here now, and with the label of what we're talking about, it is that richness. It's a beautiful word, culture. It is about the depth and complexity of culture and need that we now need to better understand in the way that we implement the NDIS. My role currently, lots of different things, but in particular, working with people like Maureen to ensure that the way we implement the scheme works for people from all backgrounds. We know that we haven't done that terribly well to date. You can see that in our statistics, and I'm going to talk to you today about how we've looked at what we've not done, what we need to do better going forward. So, if I assume, fantastic. So, as I mentioned, from our trial, you'll be aware that our statistics are not great. We had 5% of the scheme's participants joining us from an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander background, and just 4% from a CORD background. By 30 June 2016, that had improved for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander population, but had stayed very stable at that minimal 4% for people from a cultural and linguistic diverse background. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. One of those is around the fact that many of our phasing arrangements at a jurisdictional level required us to bring existing participants into the scheme from existing state government services before we brought new individuals into the scheme. That perpetuated the gap that we know now exists in the number of people from a CORD background accessing disability supports. But it also is reflected in the fact that while it was fantastic to have the decision from 2013 and we ran like crazy to get it up, we did not do enough around the sorts of things that would provide confidence for people from a CORD background to understand and access our scheme. So we are now on a trajectory of fixing that, and I want to talk to you today about our plans and strategies in that area. So we have finally, and it's very late, and again for that I apologise, but we have finally got to the point where we now have what we are calling our CORD strategy. Oh, hang on, sorry. Where we have worked for a long time with a reference group and taken a very long time to actually produce a document based and absorbing their advice. But we've got to a point now that we do have a strategy which talks about the issues that Alistair raised around making sure that there is equity in access to the scheme and equity in outcomes from the scheme for all people, including those from a CORD background. We've set ourselves what would seem to be a pretty simple goal, and it's a bit sad that we in fact have to articulate this and it goes to some of the challenges that we've discovered and encountered to date in making the scheme work. But if we can achieve this goal, then we should see significant improvement in the outcomes. So very much focused on the issues that Alistair raised, the ability to exercise choice and control, understood, embedded in our design, in our planning and in development and administration of the NDIS. What do we need? That's great Australian habit, isn't it? Shoot the flies away. What do we need to do to make that work? And I'll make my presentation quite short, so I'm very happy to take questions at the end of that, but let me know if you want anything, jump in if you want to know anything while I'm talking as well. So, a couple of priority areas. Making connections. We know that we didn't do that well in trial. We have to work out how we do that better going forward. And in particular, how do we devise strategies that are effective for engagement with CALD communities. We talk about now developing a community by community approach. And for the CALD community, we know that that might be geographical, we know it might be by core culture, it might be a combination of both. But we have to be able to design our engagement strategies so that they are no longer a one-size-fits-all. In particular, to do that, we know that we have to now devise much more effective strategies to collaborate with agencies who know, understand, connect, and can translate and interpret the scheme in both the literal but also in the meaning of the scheme and the value of the scheme for individuals. Interestingly also, I was talking to an organisation in Sydney the other day about the challenge of interpreting much of the language of disability into different languages and into the different cultures in our society. What does cerebral palsy mean in Arabic? What does autism mean in, choose any other culture that you want to look at? We have not done that well. Now, this organisation in Sydney, and again I'll piggyback off their back, but they've done this fantastic job of taking all of these disabilities and putting it into words that translate and mean something for many, many different languages and different cultures now. So that will be something that we want to be able to share and have available, because it's actually about understanding that type of impact on a person's life is what this scheme will assist an individual with, and a family, I should say, as well. I would also pay respect and acknowledge that in my time as the Barwon Trial Site Manager, I think that we lived very really the gap in understanding the challenges, and I have to acknowledge the work of Diverse Attack from the Barwon area, who just kept banging on our door and saying, you're not listening to us, you have to do something different, we have people that you should be talking with. It took us a long time to listen, to understand and to respond, and I'm hoping now that that's improved significantly, but it was not something that in those early days that we understood at all very well, and worked very much to acknowledge that this was going to be a long journey to build trust, to build understanding, and then to build our own skills to connect with and understand the issues that were being presented. So that takes me to priority area number 2 about what we have to do better. Information in preferred languages and formats. Clearly about written communication in languages, but utilising many, many more forms that work for different communities. And in particular, breaking down what we say into very simple, plain language so that people can understand access requirements and then this concept of reasonable and necessary supports. We're finally getting better at that, and you will now see on the website, if it should be working, sometimes it's not quite reliable, but we've now finally got 10 languages other than English out there, with some basic information about the access requirements for the scheme and the what we call the participant pathway, so the step-by-step process of engaging with the scheme. The languages now from my list are Arabic, Hindi, Chinese, simplified, Italian, traditional Chinese, Macedonian, Tagalog, Samoan, Greek and Vietnamese. One of the strategies that we'll use going forward is develop those languages that in a way, to reflect the communities that we're going into. So rather than trying to do all languages straight away, we will target the development of language products for the areas that we are moving into that have dominant or strong groups of a particular culture. I think the other thing from the priority area that I want to emphasise, number 3, is about understanding the choice that individuals with disability have. And our key role here will be to work with providers in the traditional disability sector, but also much more broadly around cultural competencies, understanding need, being more responsive to those needs. Really important that we increase the capacity. We'll target that through the current workforce strategies to understand the complexities and that depth of workforce skill that we need to build. From that, we are hoping that we will see and we'll work to nurture a much richer and broader service delivery offer, and hopefully new organisations entering the market. Again, talking to some organisations down in Sydney, they've done a survey around traditional disability providers and traditional cultural, linguistic, diverse support organisations about their willingness and their interest in becoming service providers, both for what are funded supports, but through what I'll talk about in a little while around the information linkage and capacity building activities. And it's fantastic to see a very rich and growing interest in understanding the opportunities that exist there. So again, we will work to try and grow that. Priority number 4, this comes back to working community by community, but it also comes back to us working with representative organisations to understand the needs and drive in that to get good access to the scheme. We are not good yet at collecting the data and the information that we need, but it's important that our processes going forward really drive practice based on evidence. When we can be confident, and this 4% has driven the need for a dedicated approach to called communities, you will find when you enter the scheme that we ask a lot of data. We ask for a lot of information and we collect a lot of information. I'll do one small tangent as an ad for the scheme more generally. Without that data and without the evidence of the impact and the engagement and the outcomes that the scheme is achieving, we don't have a base to continue to argue for the scheme. So when you fill out those endless forms and wonder where all of that data goes, it will go into the actuarial assessment of the benefit of the scheme, go right back to why Julia Gillard approved the scheme. It was because when we support people with disability appropriately, we know that we will have a positive impact on the economic and social outcome for Australia. It will contribute to the GDP of Australia. It will not be a burden, it will not be a cost. So the answer to the 2013 letter, Alistair, is absolutely it was the right time, as we all know. But we have to maintain that evidence. So when we ask you for data and fill out forms, there's a reason why we need that data. But importantly, we need your insight to come into us as well about the needs and what is or is not working. Now this is the area that, thanks to the hard work, like organisations like Diversitat, and there's a number of them in all of the different areas that we operate, we didn't do very well during trial. And so our priority area number 5, and in effect a commitment to core communities now, is that we must be much more responsive to those needs. And that for us goes to enhancing the cultural competency within the NDIA ourselves. We also will deliver the schemes through many contracted partners. Many of you might have seen the recent grant round to buy partners to help us deliver services. In New South Wales again, I'm sorry for constantly using those examples, but our partners for the local area coordination function in Sydney are now at about 23% of 25% of their staff employed from a core background, which is a fantastic statistic if you apply that to any standard public service agency. You know, that's way better than any public service agency has ever really achieved. So one of the core strategies now is to build on their existence in the community. Their contractual requirement is to have a workforce that is representative of the community in which they operate. And that will be how we absorb and respond to that diversity. So, how are we going to do all of this? At the moment, just developing up an activity plan, and we will make sure that that starts to roll out. But that plan is being guided by our advisory group. Again, we've not been great at keeping that rolling, but are getting better at that. I mentioned our local area coordinators. A key role to be on the ground, connecting, explaining, finding organisations that can help us identify individuals and bring them into the scheme. Information linkages and capacity building, a very small component of the NDIS, and I'll talk about that in a second. Market development activities, as I mentioned, around the need for information, competencies, capabilities within the scheme, and then of course working arrangements with each of the state governments about how do we transfer from the old system into our new system. Let me talk very, very quickly about ILC. As you know, the NDIS has two parts. It has the individual plans that go to address the reasonable and necessary supports for each individual. But it also has this thing called ILC, which is really targeted for people with all people with disability, their families and carers. We've spent a lot of time working with the community about how we best use the ILC component, and we've landed on this description of it: creating connections for people with disability to the wider community, going directly back to what Alistair was saying. This is about reducing that isolation, bringing and including in to a good life, to an ordinary life that each of us expects. And it will do that in two ways. Making sure that people with disability have the skills that they need to get involved in the community, and importantly building the capacity of the community to understand those needs and respond and to embrace, to respond to those needs. So We are just final, ILC will roll out as the scheme rolls out in a particular location, and you will see we start that first in the ACT, Australian Capital Territory, for June 2017, and we will learn and change as we go along, so keep your eyes open on that. There will be some national projects that we will also fund from that over time as well. Questions? I'm not sure if they do questions now or later. So, 5 minutes? Okay. We've got time.
Hi, I was just wondering who the Sydney organisation was that created the wording for different disabilities.
Settlement Services International.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Can you tell us when the comms strategy will be available?
Very soon is all I can say. We just have a couple of processes. We need to finish the action plan associated with that. That's getting closer. So certainly we have an aim to have that all done before Christmas.
Hello. I just was wondering if there are any strategies for Queensland, any coal strategies that you could talk about that are in place or coming soon?
Not direct, well, yes, in as much that we've identified that the things that we need to do to address and to increase the understanding of core communities of the scheme are in the strategy that I talked about. One of our challenges now, our next step will be to bring our regional managers from each of our hubs together, advise, train, provide them with support, so that when they start in a community, they're aware of the things that need to be done. But importantly, very much appreciate the need to, in that pre-planning phase, to connect to families from core background to make sure that they're ready to come into the scheme when we start. I'm happy to take any questions about the NDIS generally if people have those questions too.
For the My First plan, will it have a different approach for coal people, or will this also just be on the phone for the planning session?
So my first plan, again, if I take one step back from trial, we know that a lot of people were very stressed by having to have a very, very detailed conversation and thinking about the detail of their goals and their future at the same time as transitioning from the old system. So the idea of the first plan is to minimise that concern about the change, to bring you in very quickly to the scheme and ensure that you have the right supports to think about implementation and goals going forward. So we are offering that by phone to those where it works. If it's not suitable by phone, then of course you can have the face-to-face. Lots of people have been quite positive about the phone conversation, where they are clear about what their current supports are and any urgent needs that they need, and we can pop them in straight away. You will have seen some concerns on social media that they felt that they didn't have a chance to talk about their needs. But overall, the response has been positive on the basis that there's plenty of help to assist in the implementation. So there is always available the translation and information interpreting services when you're having a planned conversation. But again, that's tricky over the phone as well. We appreciate that. So if it doesn't work for you, then by all means you can ask for face-to-face.
A broad question about the NDIS. How is the agency measuring the transformative cultural change within itself from moving from a charity ethos to a rights-based that people with disabilities are actually right bearers?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that's the empowering thing about working in the agency. That most of the staff that we have attracted have come to work for the agency because they've waited a long time to be able to take that approach to their work. I'd be very confident that we don't have a welfare mentality within our staff. This is about and being driven by a recognition of the choice and control and the rights of individuals within the scheme. How do we measure that? We do internal staff surveys. We certainly do participant satisfaction surveys on a regular basis. It's a good question though. I might see if I can add that to the participant satisfaction surveys and get more of a sense of the respect with which our staff responded. Certainly there's questions like, do you feel listened to? Do you feel as if the person understood and respected your position? But I can strengthen that. It's a good thought.
Hi, good morning. First of all, I want to apologize in case what I'm going to ask been asked before, because I might misunderstood. And this is basically what we're talking about, making sure we will understand the system. I wanted to ask if we will have any information to help us, the best provider for us. I mean, gonna be lots of agencies that will give us service, and we want to make sure that we're going to choose the right one. And I know also that we will be able to go from one to another, but how we can avoid it and choose the one that will give us the best service.
I think that's a really good question. We have played with lots of ideas in that space. We are starting to see things like Higher Up come online, where there is organisations offering to identify a range of possible providers of support. I've often played with the idea of the equivalent of a TripAdvisor, where individuals would go in and they would rate their view of providers. Haven't seen that emerge yet, but one of the things that the LACs will be able to provide you with is the list of the providers in the area, and understanding your particular needs, they will start to get which providers do what well. But I think it's a really good space for us to see some growth, both driven by individuals, but also from the sector around self-assessment and self-rating that we haven't seen in that transparency in the provider sector yet.